Welcome back. This is part 4 of our 6-part Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking webcast. The whole point of everything I have said up until this point is to illustrate in a variety of ways that the only reason that people smoke is to get nicotine. This is amply proven by the fact that as soon as you take the nicotine out of cigarettes, nobody smokes them. But ironically, while nicotine is an extremely addictive drug, in the sense that it hooks smokers very quickly, it's also a very weak drug in the sense that it leaves your body very quickly and that it has no really noticeable physical withdrawal symptoms. So it's not so much the physical aspect of addiction that creates the problems, it's the beliefs that smokers have about smoking that really hooks them. Towards the end of part 3, I mentioned that there were really only 3 essentials to finding it easy to quit. The first of which is to realize that there's nothing to give up. If there were any benefits to smoking whatsoever, they'd be plastered all over the pack, or you could give the tobacco company a call and they could describe them to you. There is truly nothing to give up. The second essential to finding it easy to stop smoking is to understand that while physical withdrawal from nicotine does exist, it's barely even noticeable. The fact is that smokers go into physical withdrawal from nicotine the second they put out a cigarette. In fact, many smokers sleep through the night, going through physical withdrawal from nicotine the whole time, and it's so mild that it doesn't even wake them up. It's interesting that physical withdrawal from nicotine only seems to come into play when we want to smoke, but we can't. Does that not seem odd to you? Does it not seem odd that a chain smoker can sleep for 8 hours, going through physical withdrawal from nicotine the whole time, and it's so mild it doesn't even wake him up, but as soon as he tries to stop smoking, 5 minutes later, he's having a nic fit? It just doesn't make any sense. How can this be caused by physical withdrawal from nicotine? People who are trying to quit smoking using willpower, or variations of the willpower method, do not understand these 2 key points: that there's nothing to give up, or that physical withdrawal from nicotine is very, very mild. In fact, far from believing there's nothing to give up, these people believe they're losing their best friend. They also believe that physical withdrawal from nicotine is this gut-wrenching family of emotions based around fear and anxiety and irritability and so on. Now, because they believe these 2 things, they are forced down the willpower path. And I want to demonstrate why this creates so much fear and misery. Every so often, something happens in our lives that triggers the thought process about quitting smoking. Sometimes it's a phone call with bad news that someone in your family has been diagnosed with a smoking-related illness or condition. Sometimes it's something as predictable as New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, where as a smoker you kind of feel it's your duty to try to quit smoking. So whatever the trigger, though, the thought process is the same. Deep down, we know we'd be 10 times better off as a non-smoker, but the thought of never being able to smoke again is absolutely terrifying. Then, of course, there is the brainwashing about how hard it is to quit. You see, because we still believe that smoking relaxes us, it helps us concentrate, it helps us cope with stress, we feel that we'll be deprived of these pleasures or this crutch, and that without it, we're expecting to be a basket case, and a pretty miserable one at that. And on top of that, we aren't even really sure that this is what we want in the first place. We're only really doing this for our parents, for our kids, for our partners, and so on and so forth. And on top of all of this, we're convinced we're going to fail anyway. Ring a bell, anyone? Think about it rationally. Wouldn't you be absolutely staggered if a person with these belief systems, if they actually succeeded in quitting smoking? Wouldn't you be absolutely staggered? Would you expect this person to find it easy or difficult? Frankly, I'd expect them to find quitting smoking impossible. It is going to be miserable and unpleasant because in their mind, they're not killing an enemy. They're losing a friend. But despite all these fears and doubts, we have to at least go through the fiasco of pretending to try to quit smoking. Now, let's say that you have more willpower than I do. Let's say you can muscle your way through the first couple of hours or the first couple of days or even the first couple of weeks. Then our minds, our brains begin playing tricks on us. After sort of what we perceive as surviving those first traumatic days as a non-smoker, we begin to let our guard down a little bit. And these are harmless thoughts to begin with. Just the odd thought floating in here and there about, wouldn't it be nice to have the odd one here when I'm having a coffee or when I'm out having a drink, just to help me relax, or in a stressful situation, just to help me cope, and so on. And soon, and very often under the influence of alcohol, we decide that it's safe, maybe just to smoke one cigarette. But of course, this wakes up all of your old smoking thoughts, beliefs, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, your brain is screaming at you to smoke another one, and another one, and another one. In the space of a few seconds, you have transformed from a non-smoker who's desperate to have a cigarette to being a smoker who's desperate to stop again. One is no fun, and one is even less fun. And now we trot out the old, excuses, but inevitably we start to beat ourselves up. How could I be so stupid? I was free. Why did I go back to smoking? And then the horror kicks in. What if I can never quit again? The reality is that if you're using willpower to quit smoking, it is profoundly depressing. There's absolutely no question about that. And many willpower quitters mistakenly describe this kind of depression as physical withdrawal from nicotine. But in fact, these symptoms are created really by two things. Firstly, by the false belief that by stopping smoking that we're somehow giving something up or losing something. And the second thing that causes these feelings is doubt. Doubt over, how will I know that I'm done? When will I know that I'm done? When will I be truly free? In our live seminars, we encourage people, attendees, to express their doubts and fears in this area. The two questions that come up most frequently, by a long way, is firstly, when will I know that I've done it, that I've successfully quit smoking? And the second is, how will I know that I've really done it? You see, these are questions really that torture people who are trying to quit smoking using willpower, because they're desperate to try to get closure on these issues, but they're unable to do so, and it's very important that we try and do this. Every week we get hundreds and hundreds of calls from people who are trying to quit smoking using willpower in varying stages of panic, and wherever we can, we offer advice, and we encourage them to ask these questions of themselves. So how will you know when you're done? When will you know when you're done? Some people say, I'll wake up tomorrow morning and I'll be a non-smoker and that's it. And truth be told, if you let it be that easy, I'm sure it would be. But I've seen many, many people relapse after 24 hours using willpower, so it can't be anything to do with that. Some people say 3 days. Now, at 3 days, you are 100% nicotine free. Technically, you're no longer an addict. But again, I've seen many, many, many people using willpower relapse after 3 days. Can't be anything to do with that. Some say 3 weeks. This is when your oxygen levels return to normal, those of a non-smoker, and you really do begin to feel different at a physical level. But again, I've seen many people using willpower relapse after 3 weeks. Some people say 3 months. This is a popular answer from people who are using a lot of the quit smoking aids that are available on the market these days. The patch, the gum, some of the pills, and so on and so forth. Most of these are 12-week, 3-month programs. But really, it might sound good in a support leaflet, but does it work in real life? I mean, what's so important about 3 months? Why not 2.5 months or 4.5 months? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, are you being told that for 11 weeks and 6 days you're going to be like a bear with a sore head, but miraculously on the 12th week you're going to wake up and feel fantastic to be a non-smoker? Why would this happen? It doesn't make any sense. In any case, if you're nicotine-free after 3 days, then what's the point of a 12-week program of nicotine patches or nicotine gum anyway? Some people say a year. You give me a year as a non-smoker and then I'll really know that I'm done. But it's the same as the 3-month argument. And you're telling me that you're going to be miserable for 364 days, but then miraculously you're going to feel fantastic on the 365th? Why would this happen? I have seen many, many people quit smoking on New Year's Day as a New Year's resolution. And I have seen them many celebrate a year smoke-free with a big fat cigar the next New Year's Eve. Guess what? They are back buying cigarettes the next day. Can't be anything to do with that. Some people say, I will never know. Or even worse, I will never be truly free. Once an addict, always an addict, huh? Many such people have also quit drinking or using other drugs with AA or a variation of the kind of 12-step approach. And whilst I'm extremely loath to criticize such an incredible organization, an organization that has helped millions of families across the world, I think it is definitely true to say that people really get unstuck when they try to apply some of the 12 steps to smoking. And I feel that I need to address this topic because 12 steps really is the prevalent mentality in addiction counseling in North America. And it's been applied to just about every addiction going. So I really feel that I need to cover this mindset. In particular, I think that there are a couple of aspects of the 12 steps that, and related beliefs and practices that can kind of create a barrier to lasting success with respect to quitting smoking. The first is the notion of being in permanent recovery. In AA, you continue to define yourself as an alcoholic for the rest of your life, whether you actually drink the stuff or not. And the implication is that we must apply this to smoking, in that we remain nicotine addicts forever, whether we smoke or not. My own view is that this might prevent some people from really closing the book and moving on with the rest of their lives. You know, in a sense, this notion of addiction as a lifelong disease is a bit sad, you know, because it continues to give the drug power over you, even if it's no longer any part of your life whatsoever. As far as we're concerned, when you stop smoking, you become a happy non-smoker, not a nicotine addict in recovery for the rest of your life. There is a very big difference there. I think another concept that fails to kind of cross the divide between alcohol and nicotine is this idea of one day at a time. For many people, this concept prevents them really from breaking free because they're only ever looking at their addiction one day at a time. You're only clean or sober one day at a time. You know, we believe that as soon as you put this whole thing behind you and you begin to rack up the smoke-free days and weeks and months and years, there is absolutely no need to continue to take things one day at a time. The facts of smoking never, ever, ever change. So what's the point of having the same debate on a daily basis? Think about it like this. You and I could have a debate about whether the Earth is round or whether the Earth is flat. And I'm fairly confident we would come to a consensus that the Earth is round, or spherical at least. I'm sure it wouldn't take much persuading one way or the other. But if I gave you a call tomorrow and said, hey, do you fancy having that debate again about whether the Earth is round or whether the Earth is flat? I mean, you'd think I was crazy. You would say to me, and quite rightly, you would say to me, you know, Damien, we had this debate yesterday. We assembled all the information we needed yesterday. We analyzed and debated this information yesterday. We came to a conclusion yesterday. Nothing has changed since yesterday. So what's the point of having the same debate again? You see, exactly the same is true of smoking. One of the problems of using the willpower approach to quitting smoking is that success is defined in negative terms. Let me clarify this point. If it's your objective never to smoke for the rest of your life, then how do you know you've achieved that objective until you've lived the rest of your life? You see, it's not like a driving test where you take the test, you pass, you fail, you get closure, you can move on. This is like a question mark that hangs over people who are trying to quit smoking using willpower. It hangs over them for the rest of their lives. Some people say, you know, I don't know when it will be, But one day I'll wake up and I will feel like a non-smoker. And I know exactly what they mean. And I used to think that there was a large germ of truth in this. But if you think about it for a minute, it doesn't really make much sense. Because you don't really feel that differently as a non-smoker. I mean, don't misunderstand me. You'll feel a lot happier, a lot healthier, and a lot wealthier. But you'll still be you. You know, you're not going to grow an extra arm or an extra head or anything like this. You'll be you. You just won't have to smoke anymore, that's all. Why do we give the cigarette so much power? I mean, really, why do we put it up here on this pedestal and we give it all this power? Why do we let ourselves be defined by our smoking status? Alan's method looks to get closure on these issues. And the truth is that it's much simpler than you think. You will be free the second you decide that you will not have your life and your family's future dominated by a 4-inch stick of dry vegetable matter that doesn't even get you high. The second you make this simple decision, you'll be free. And if you stay happy with that decision, you will stay happily smoke-free. It really is that simple. You see, very early on in our smoking lives, we give this thing power. And ever since, it has used that power to create fear and doubt. And it has used fear and doubt to keep a hold over you. Today, we are replacing fear and doubt with facts, with information. And you can use this information to make a better decision. Because let's face it, we make better decisions when we make them based on facts rather than based on fear. In a sense, what we're trying to do is to empower you to kind of press a button that enables you to go back to the day you started smoking and empower you to make that decision again. But this time, instead of making that decision based on the illusions of smoking, today you're making them based on the reality of smoking. Because if you had known then what you know now about smoking, you never would have lit that first cigarette. In fact, you would have found it remarkably easy not to light that first cigarette. One of the things I think that can make the prospect of quitting so terrifying, so intimidating for many people, is the horror stories we hear from people that have already quit smoking using willpower. Everyone knows at least one of these angry, bitter, twisted ex-smokers. And boy, don't they love sharing their misery with you. I remember one such occasion when I was at a party in London. And a guy I had never met sort of drifted over to our group, and he introduced himself, and there was a bit of a lull in conversation, and he turned around to me and he said hi, he said, I see you're a very heavy smoker, and he said, I wanted to share with you how I quit smoking. And to be honest with you, I felt that this was extremely rude. I mean, to go up to someone that you never met before and start lecturing them how to quit smoking, I feel this is very rude. But of course, being a polite Irishman, I just nodded and carried on listening. And I have to admit, it was actually a fascinating story. What had happened is that this guy had gone with a bunch of friends to Dublin in Ireland on a stag weekend, on a bachelor party weekend. And of course these young men had not used alcohol responsibly. They'd been pounding down the Guinness and the whiskey chasers, as boys will be boys. Anyway, this guy was not a big drinker, and he had sort of fallen over fairly early in the evening. So his friends had taken him back to the bed and breakfast, and they'd dumped him in the bed and breakfast, and they had gone back out. Anyway, when he was back in his room, this guy had been copiously, violently sick from all of the alcohol. And he said to me, he said, Damien, when I woke up the following day, he said, you would not believe how bad I felt. He said, all of the alcohol was out of my system because I'd been so sick the night before. He said, but I had that smoking hangover. You know, the one where you've smoked your boots off the night before. It's like someone's parked a truck on your chest. Your mouth, your throat, your head, your chest, your lungs, your stomach. I mean, you feel toxic. well, actually, you are toxic. I mean, you've been poisoned, and this is exactly how it feels. Anyway, this guy was lying in bed, feeling absolutely dreadful, and he said, this thought just popped into my mind. He said, this didn't make any sense. He said, I refused to accept that it was somehow mandatory for me to go through the rest of my life doing something that made me feel this bad. He said, it just didn't make any sense. I didn't do it in any other area of my life, so why would I have to do it here? Okay, I overindulge with alcohol a couple of times a year, but I don't wake up the next morning and start drinking again. I give it a rest. And he said, there and then, I decided, I was done with this. I'm going to have the smoking debate. You know, the one we always promise ourselves we're going to have, and we never seem to quite get round to having it. Anyway, he said, I'm going to have the smoking debate. And what's more, I'm going to decide, I'm going to act on whatever I decide. So if I decide that I'm going to stay a smoker, I'm going to stay a smoker. I'm never going to try to cut down. I'm never going to try to quit. I'm just going to try to be happy, try to make the best of it, try and get on with life. And if I decided that I was going to quit smoking, I made a commitment that I would never, ever, ever touch a product that contained nicotine in it ever again. And I would just try and be happy, I'd try and make the best of it, try and get on with life. This was the commitment that he made himself. So he started to go through the pros and cons of smoking in his mind. And he said to me, you know, I realized I just could not find an excuse to keep doing something that made me feel this bad. He said, I just couldn't do it. He said, I went through the pros and cons of smoking. I looked for any excuse to keep smoking. Couldn't find one anywhere. And he said, there and then, I made a decision. He said, I didn't care whether it was going to be easy or difficult. I didn't care. I made a commitment that I would never, ever, ever smoke another cigarette as long as I lived. And he said, you know what? It was easy. He said, I was expecting to find it difficult because every other time I tried, it was impossible. He said, this time it was a piece of cake. He said, I just walked away from the whole thing. Now, I'm standing there listening to this guy tell this story, and this is during a period of my life where I'm trying to quit smoking every single Sunday night. I would have given anything to quit smoking. And so I'm listening to this story, and as you can imagine, I'm beginning to get pretty interested. And because basically what this guy's saying is that it's all up here, it's all in your head. You get your head in the right place. Quitting smoking, piece of cake. So I was listening to this guy, and I was really, like I said, beginning to get quite interested in the whole thing. Just as I was beginning to kind of come out my shell a little bit, there was a lady standing next to me. To be honest, I'd not even realized she was there. It turns out she had been listening to this whole conversation. She turned round, she said, you guys are talking about quitting smoking? And this guy says, yeah. She says, I have to tell you. She said, tonight is my 4th anniversary of quitting smoking. She said, I quit smoking 4 years ago today. She said, but at times like this, when I'm at a party, she said, I could kill for a smoke. Bang, that was it. That one sentence hit me like a freight train. That one sentence put me off even trying to quit smoking for months. Because I thought, what is the point? What is the point of going through what I, at that time, still perceived to be this very difficult, very unpleasant process of quitting, just so I can be miserable in 4 years' time? Heck, I'm miserable now. I may as well just keep smoking. The utter futility of smoking is right there. There I was, a smoker desperate to stop. There she was, a non-smoker desperate to smoke. The whole thing's insane. In fact, Alan doesn't even really call these people ex-smokers and non-smokers. He calls them smokers who are not currently smoking. And I think this is a much more accurate description, actually, because I think the real issue is whether or not you have a desire to smoke. I mean, if you have a desire to smoke, you may be able to use willpower to overcome that desire for a couple of hours or a couple of days or a couple of weeks or even a couple of years. But it'll rear up and bite you at some point. And this explains why so many people who quit smoking using willpower are so anxious and edgy. I mean, they're supposed to be going to parties and social situations relaxed and happy and content, but instead they're going a little bit anxious and edgy, thinking, is tonight the night I'm going to have one glass of wine too many and end up back smoking a pack a day? To help themselves overcome this fear, these people pick on smokers. In a sense, they make themselves feel better by making you feel worse. Now, personally, I think it's extremely important to learn lessons from these angry, miserable ex-smokers using willpower. Now, the most obvious lesson is that whatever they are suffering from, it is nothing to do with nicotine. I mean, think about it. The woman at the party had been nicotine-free for years. It's just not biologically possible that she was craving nicotine. This woman's problems were twofold. Firstly, the way she perceived smoking. When she saw people smoking, the way her brain processed this information was that these people were getting to smoke, and that she just wasn't allowed to do this anymore, which made her feel a little bit deprived, which in turn made her feel anxious and vulnerable. Secondly, because she had never understood that there were no benefits to smoking, she continued to believe that the cigarette would help her relax, cope with stress, do this and do this and do this. And because she believed these things, she still had a desire to smoke. And because she still had a desire to smoke, she had to use willpower in these situations not to. Now, as a result, she had never been able to close the book on this issue and move on with the rest of her life. And this made her vulnerable, especially in situations where she was consuming alcohol and she wasn't able to think as straight as normally as she might be able to. You see, for me, the only show in town is to be a happy non-smoker. I mean, if you're going to be miserable, you may as well keep smoking. The only show in town is to be a happy non-smoker. And the only way to be a happy non-smoker is to have no desire to smoke. This is just the only way of doing it. So how do we remove the desire to smoke? Well, first you have to debunk the myths that are associated with smoking, and this we did in parts 2 and 3 of this webcast. Now, we need to replace those illusions with the reality of life as a smoker. You see, I have absolutely no desire to smoke, because I remember very, very clearly what life as a smoker was like. I remember what it was like to feel controlled from the moment I woke up in the morning to the moment I went to bed at night. Never, ever getting a break or a day off. I remember the smell. I'm quite a clean person. I mean, I'm not obsessive or anything, but I'm a very clean person. And when I was a smoker, I just never felt clean. I always felt dirty. You feel like there's this film of filth on your face. I mean, how many of you have turned your face when you're hugging someone you love because you don't want them to smell your breath? I mean, what does this do for your self-respect? What does this do for your self-esteem? I remember the heart flutters I used to get when I smoked. I mean, they absolutely terrify you. I mean, I was absolutely convinced I was about to have a heart attack and die. What's the first thing you do when they die down? Go for a smoke. I didn't go to a dentist for nearly 15 years because I was so ashamed of the state of my gums and my teeth. And I knew a dentist would take one look in my mouth and say, "That's it, Damien, you have to stop smoking today." But I didn't want to hear it. I was too scared. I never had a family doctor until I moved here. I would only go to these walk-in clinics where you can see a different guy every time. Because I thought, if one doctor had my file, if he had my family history of smoking-related diseases and conditions, he would see the deterioration in my health and he would say to me, "Damien, you have to stop smoking right now." And I didn't want to hear it. I was just too scared. I remember the anxiety I would feel if I was going somewhere where I didn't know if I'd be able to smoke or not. Eventually, this anxiety got so bad, I just stopped going to new places. I mean, how many avenues of learning and pleasure and experience and understanding have you cut yourself off from so that you can continue to do your drug? I remember having to explain to my family that we wouldn't be able to go on vacation again this year because we couldn't afford it. As the cost of smoking increased, frankly, it was my family that really paid the price. I remember turning down promotions because no one on the 5th floor smoked. I knew that senior management would think less of me because I did smoke. I remember trying to hide my smoking from my boss, like a child. I mean, this made me feel guilty and stupid, and I'm not a stupid person. I remember the lethargy, the lack of energy, feeling like an old man in my 20s and early 30s. I mean, having been an athlete when I was a kid, this was extremely difficult for me to accept. Sport really was my true passion, and cigarettes stole it from me. I remember my eldest daughter's first day at school. They sent her home in less than an hour. It took us ages to find out what had happened. She was in hysterics the whole time. There was a poster in her classroom that said, "Smoking kills." As a young child, she didn't understand that, well, people smoke for a long time, they get sick for a long time, then they die. She thought I was going to drop dead any second. This poor kid was terrified. She was begging me, "Daddy, please don't smoke." But what can you say? What can you do? I spent hours with her that night, trying to calm her down, trying to get her to go to sleep. She refused to shut her eyes to go to sleep that night, because she thought if she shut her eyes, I would die. All the time, all I was thinking was, I wish this child would go to sleep so I could go and have a cigarette. I remember Sunday dinners at my mum's house, sneaking out for a cigarette afterwards. On one occasion, just out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mum's face. It stopped me dead in my tracks. Up until then, I'd only thought about how my smoking affected me. I hadn't thought about how it affected other people. My mum's face was this mask of pain and despair over how somebody she loved so much could be doing this. You know, aware of my own, my family's smoking history, how I could be doing this with knowledge of our smoking history. In fact, very shortly after this incident, I took a job back in Hong Kong, 9,000 miles away. And looking back, I realized it was because I didn't want to be confronted with this guilt on a weekly basis. So I just ran away from it. In fact, my smoking drove a huge wedge between me and my family. All those years I smoked. It was only when I quit smoking, I went back to my family, I realized how much I love these people. I mean, what a waste of life. Choosing a 4-inch stick of poison over your own family. I remember watching my Uncle Richard die of lung cancer. An absolutely agonizing death. You know, in front of my eyes, he died. The first thing I did, went for a smoke. I remember the panic attacks I used to have. I had panic attacks, I would say, more or less on a weekly basis for the last 4 or 5 years of my smoking life. The first time it happened to me, I was driving to work one Monday morning and I was suddenly overwhelmed with this notion that this wasn't going to get better. It was just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And this thought put me into a tailspin. Believe it or not, I have never had a panic attack since I quit smoking. In fact, after about a month, I didn't even bother carrying the medication around with me. Because I realized these panic attacks were caused by smoking. As a non-smoker, I had no use for this medication. I remember feeling less than other people. Why could they get through life quite happily as non-smokers, and I couldn't even change the channel on the remote without lighting up? What was wrong with me? I remember feeling angry and frustrated. Why couldn't I do this one thing for all of these people that I love so much? What is wrong with me? But more than anything, I hated being a slave. I hated being a slave to something that never gave me anything in return, apart from fear, anxiety, and stress. These are my memories of smoking. Not this. These are my memories of smoking. And that's why I don't smoke. I mean, do you honestly think that it takes me willpower not to do something that made me feel like that? What on earth has willpower got to do with that? I can assure you, it does not take willpower not to smoke when this is the way you see smoking. In fact, wild horses couldn't drag me back to smoking. Your 9th instruction is immediately after this seminar to write down how it felt to live life as a smoker. Not how it felt to smoke one cigarette, but how it felt to live life as a smoker. to have to smoke all day, every day, never being able to stop. Start with how it makes you smell. Go on to describe how it feels to be a slave to dry vegetable matter, what that does for your self-respect and for your self-esteem. And don't pull any punches. Tell it exactly how it is. I always think that someone like Nelson Mandela enjoys his freedom more than you or I could ever even begin to understand, because for so many years he had it taken away from him. Well, to enjoy freedom, you have to be able to remember what being a prisoner feels like. Please write this list as soon as you can and keep it close at hand. As I'll be talking about later, this list will become the key tools that enable you to walk away from the slavery of smoking and to remain happily smoke-free for the rest of your life. This is the end of part 4. We recommend that you go for a smoke break now and watch part 5 immediately afterwards, if at all possible. At the end of part 5, we will ask you to smoke a final cigarette. So this is your second to final cigarette. Don't panic. In part 5, I have nothing but good news for you.